Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, one and all, rule of Carnage, folks. I have a lovely Daddy Elf cup of coffee. Glenn has been warming his snowballs up over a roasting fire. And we thought, well, Glenn suggested, and I agreed, that we'd maybe just have a little kickback and retrospect on our year of gaming. Have a little think about the things we've played, what we liked, what we took away from it. Um, Glenn and I have both been working on quite a lot of games this year, so we'll probably talk about some of our own stuff because that's what we do here to continue to promote our own selves. But yeah, we also played quite a lot of other stuff. I've got a list here of things that's reasonably decent. Much better than last year, actually. I think I played a much broader gamut of things. Um, yeah, Glenn, do you want to cast your mind back to the snowy wasteland of January, February 2023?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we'll start sort of talking about tabletop. Well, tabletop minis games that we've played.
Yeah, I've got mostly minis games. There's a couple of other class of things on this list, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll start with one of the ones that we've probably spoken about plenty on the channel, but it's one of the small handful of games I really enjoyed that I haven't come across before this year, that'll be Mars Code Aurora.
Oh yeah.
Which we've played. I've sort of knocked around on my own a few times. Just really lovely sci-fi minis agnostic game. One of my favorite rules that we've mentioned a few times. The rule that allows you to do anything if you're willing to negotiate with the other player. Really lovely sort of objective driven gameplay, and the sort of the zoning of the sort of null zones from these sort of patrolling robots, just full of like very interesting ideas, really elegantly implemented. It's genuinely one of those ones where I picked it up not expecting a huge amount, tiny little thin rule book, and everything it did just made me very happy, and I was just delighted with the whole package. So that was a highlight of
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I've got a lot of juice out of that design. It's really, really interesting. Yeah, we should play some more of that in 24.
absolutely. So anything?
Yeah, so on a sci-fi theme then, I think probably starting at the beginning of the year, but probably the thing I've played the most this year is a thing that you can't have called that has a proper name that's Malleus Maleficarum, which is the name of an old textbook called The Hammer of Witches, which is
Yes.
like a 1700s witch finding manual. But that's my code word for my code name for my homebrew Inquisifo rules, where we
Oh yeah.
took we took Malifaux. I took Malifaux and I boiled down all of the character cards to their constituent actions, and then made them a palette of things that you could build your own custom models out of. So it sort of takes the kit bashing of Ink 28 more than even Inquisitor, and the sort of five dudes versus five dudes. And because I've been playing it with our our very imaginative friend Rufus, like he and I were always set up with by flipping out the strategy and the scheme and then trying to explain what's going on and why each of the gangs is there and stuff. And I've hacked that system quite a lot over the last year, and it's been both. So we talked a bunch of times actually about how a really good way to practice design is to house rule things. And so this is very much like in the direction of a design that I am sort of hypothetically working on. There's a lot more. There's a lot like it will be a very different game out the other side, but like it's been really fun to futz around in somebody else's system, particularly one as robust as the Malifaux engine. So yeah, that's the most I've done a lot of that this year and painted a lot of models for it.
When you say you're sort of other people aren't going to get to have it, is it and you just put a lot of energy into it? Is it because it's so grounded in somebody else's system, or is
Yeah, because it's basically house rules for somebody else's system. But I think it's more because like the work that I'm doing, like every time I do a change to it, it gets further away from the source material, and I'm more and more happy of it as like a prototype for something that I want to be making anyway. Um, so yeah.
That's in interesting sort of design approach. I tend to sort of come at things with big ideas rather than like fiddle other people's stuff.
I normally do as well. But in this case, it's allowing me because like a complicated wide open skirmish game is quite a big thing to address. What can be quite a big, I mean, it depends how big you go, but like I want this to be very, very Catholic with a little c in its ability to describe models and scenarios. And so worrying about whether or not I can write a build your own faction, build your own models type system with enough juice in there that it's not just like obviously min-maxing its way to a couple of optimal points. Like that is a fun enough challenge that like what the skirmish rules are, whatever. They could be could be anything.
Cool. So the other game that I really enjoyed playing that we've played a few times for video playing and friends of the channel will be aware of was Torch and Shield.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
Dwarfy goodness.
yes, again, something that I don't have a problem with grid-based games. I don't necessarily have good advice for designing grid-based games. But I did sort of look at it and go like, okay, I'm not sure how this is going to work. It is grid based. You've got to sort of have a bit of a faff of setup and whatever. And it was surprisingly flexible, genuinely tactically enjoyable, told a really great story. And yeah, I think we played it a few times. It's one of the few things I've made the effort to play solo a bit actually, because it does sort of it can carry a story and you can carry it as a solo game. So that was really nice. I don't do a lot of I don't think I've ever really done solos miniatures gaming other than like when playtesting.
Mm.
And so like whereas I do a reasonable amount of solo tabletop board gaming, card gaming generally.
Mm.
So it's quite nice to have something like Torch and Shield pop up and go like, okay, well, if I do have that sort of itch to scratch for solo gaming and miniatures gaming at the same time, here's a way of doing it. And here's a good reason to pull out my ancient and battered Hero Quest box and get the board onto the table, duct tape together.
Yeah, that I think is one of the things that's really charming about it is it's got a funny little alchemy of old Warhammer quests, Blood Bowl, and I guess to transition into another of the things that I've played, um, Middle Earth or Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, and I didn't know any of that, and the first time we played it and when we videoed it because to jump around the year a bit, like the last thing that I've played is my first game of Middle Earth strategy battle game, which is just like a big sort of third of the GW gaming estate that I've just never interacted with. I wasn't in the hobby when it came out was my like out of the hobby time pretty much, and so I never got into the game. And yeah, it was super interesting because a lot of the heritage in the way that engagement works, the way that combat works, the way that dice rolls work. Suddenly I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like Torch and Shield is designed by a designer who's very rooted in that game system. Like some of those conventions are very natural to that designer, and they seemed surprising and new to me because I just hadn't plowed that, and I'm not sure what the metaphor is, but I wasn't familiar with that with that game.
Plow that
Yeah,
way.
that was fun, and I'm looking forward to playing more of that game. The current edition seems very tidy. I have no idea how engagement and pairing up in combat is supposed to work. But that feels like I'll just go down the club and I'll get some of the guys that play Middle Earth to
Yeah.
like, I'll show them a couple of chess problems with like, what if I push this guy back and this guy hasn't was only supporting and he hasn't actually had an attack yet, and like what happens now? And there's some density that I need to get some more experienced players to unpack for me.
Yeah, I do think that the what was Lord of the Rings and is yes now the Middle of strategy battle game, probably one of the best things that GW have put out and have sort of regularly supported for quite some time. I certainly rate it above either of the other two, 40K and Age of Sigmar, and even when it was Warhammer Fantasy Battle, I think it was a better game than Warhammer Fantasy Battle as well.
Heresy.
I mean, it's just it's a thing that feels like has just been thought about. The
Well, so then that's an
fantasy
interesting
battle.
question. Then why didn't you play, 15 years of solid Lord of the Rings?
I mean, well, because Lord of the Rings was just harder to find people to play. I mean, I played a
Ah,
good
right.
deal of Lord of the Rings. From once I picked it up, and I picked it up late at club.
Mm,
And then once people were playing it, I almost always had Lord of the Rings Force with me, like anytime I go to club.
mm.
It just wasn't necessarily. And I think also because around the time I started playing that, people were starting to get more interested in things like Saga, Test of Honor, generally sort of more wider
That
independent.
was an interesting time post Fantasy Battle's demise because round our Canterbury club we had a big solid Fantasy Battle crew, and actually going back to the club this year, which is something that I've finally been able to do after a few years of um, being away. It's really interesting to see how many people are playing sixth edition back at the club, how many people are playing ninth age. And it's fun because I'm kind of coming in with Hobgoblin going, "Do you want to try Hobgoblin?" And they're like, "Yeah, we tried it during the playtesting when it was super broken. Fool us once."
That was a good long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other games that are new to you that you've read or played that you
Well,
want
yeah. So speaking of the club, one of the things
to
I did the
encourage
most down the
yourself?
club was one of our fellows is quite a big proponent of the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms game, and I saw that he was doing a demo game, so I kind of clicked into a couple of demo games of that. Really enjoyed it. It's a Mark Latham system, I think, and it's incredibly deep and dense. The core mechanics are quite simple, but then there's tons and tons and tons of chrome piled on top of it, which I think is mostly good because you tend to be dealing with just a very small number of models, two, three, four guys in your crew, and then there's loads of like NPCs, and there's just a billion different like victory point things, and so whether wisely or not, we were playing a four-player versus game, and the second time we played it, there was four persons and a load of like villagers in the middle. But yeah, like it does a lot of narrative skirmishy things. You can do lots of stuff in it. Monsters keep turning up. I mean, I think I genuinely enjoyed it the most because both times we were playing with three and then four players, and we had a GM who knew the rules. And that's also the first time I've ever played a GM'd miniatures game. So that's a first for me. So that's cool. I'd originally bought Call to Arms ages ago when it first came out because it had a solo delve mode, and I'd never got it to the table, so I'd never learned the rules. And now I've had a chance to get it demoed. At least I know the rules, and I can pop it open for a solo play when necessary. So yeah, that's Call to Arms. I think it's about to get a second edition of the rulebook, or maybe just did.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got a digital version of it somewhere, and I don't know.
The digital edition's no good because it's just it's a wash with cards.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. It's like I feel my I don't know if it's as I'm getting older, but just systems that work by virtue of how much like Chrome is stacked up on the core system, I have less and less and less patience for. And I think it's one of the things that we experience with another system that we might not mention, um, that we played through the year, which is I don't know how much I'm meant to engage and how much I'm meant to switch off. Because a lot of the time with like a very narrative game with a lot of chrome on it, I feel like I'm not I'm not intended to grasp all the chrome. I'm meant to just like, well, pick a guy and then pick his like appropriate things and then learn what those appropriate things do. I ignore everything else, and when it happens to, it will be a delightful surprise, as it would have been if you'd been attacked by that thing because you shouldn't really know everything about everything.
Right, right. So
And know
like
some things.
almost treating it like a sort of the discovery that you get inside a digital game where you can't know all the weapons yet, but of course you can in a textbook based rule book where you can analyze all the things. And we've been conditioned, a certain kind of player has been conditioned by a certain kind of game to achieve mastery and knowledge, and thus victory through better learning.
Yeah, and it's always it's that difficulty sometimes when you're playing an RPG and you've got to remember that your character doesn't know what you know.
Mm.
Like we recently played a horror RPG together earlier this year, and one of the things I was struggling with was all of the players know that they're going into a horror RPG, but none of the characters know that they're going into a horror RPG. And then it's like that thing of like, stop acting, stop acting like we're in a horror movie. We don't know we're in a horror movie. And it's like, where are you meant to switch that off? And
Yeah, that was so that was Alien, the
yes,
new Alien RPG that we played. We actually played that in person. Shocking,
yes, actual face
very
to face
delightful.
gaming.
We did a little one shot. One of our friends ran. I think he was expecting to kill us all, but we just escaped.
Well, it was one of those moments where I think he had to choose what was the most dramatic and sort of, and it felt like the killing everybody would have been an anticlimax because it hadn't been properly set up, whereas
That's right. Yeah, the narrative beats hadn't.
the desperate escape was slightly more narratively. But it was one of those things where we were going into something had gone wrong, and like we're the rescue team, and then somebody else is like, no, let's go off and do this other completely obviously insane thing. Why would we do that? Well, because the place is full of aliens. We don't know that we're meant to be rescuing our friends. Let's try and act as if we're so,
Yeah, absolutely.
and I think
One thing I really loved about playing that role-playing game in person, and John, our friend who ran it, is uh, delightfully like grounded in the same old school mentality as me. So he brought tons of paper handouts, like maps and all kinds of bits and bobs and photos. It was so good. It was really good. Speaking of role playing games, the other one that I recall playing this year was we. I managed to convince you guys to try Dungeon Crawl Classics because I was really intrigued to play at least one of the vast stable of like um, old school Renaissance type games. I know that Dungeon Crawl Classics is sort of on the periphery of that, but I picked up the rule book. It baffled me. I got some adventures. It started to make a little bit more sense. And then I ran a couple of adventures. I ran that adventure for you guys for my 4-year-old and my 6-year-old first,
okay.
so that to like get a feel for it.
Well, what was weird about that was that was meant to be a funnel adventure, wasn't it? And I'd heard a lot about these sort of the first, the first funnel adventure where you're meant to all get like multiple characters, and then one person's supposed to limp out the end of it, and then they reach level one with an actual story. And I don't know whether it's because you're coming from from a different perspective, or you're just not mean enough, or we were all too cowardly or whiny or something. But no one died. We got to the end of it and no one died, and it was like, this isn't what I was. What do we do now? Do we put them
Yeah, no,
in another funnel or?
I honestly don't know because like what I expected from a funnel is essentially that you guys kind of got pushed down some kind of dungeon and then traps and monsters kept springing out and just unavoidably out overpowering you. But what actually happened, because the one that we played is Hole in the Sky, and spoilers for like the first 5 minutes of it. Like you begin with a situation where you're told to walk out on an invisible bridge over the ocean, but you don't know and you aren't told like when the bridge appears and how wide the bridge is and blah blah blah. So I think it's just assumed that people just like fall into the sea or like accidentally walk off the side of the bridge, which A is super boring and stupid, and B, like any person who's played an RPG is immediately throwing sand and like tapping and stuff. Like there is an intelligent way to solve this problem, and that's what everyone did. They came up with amusing and entertaining ways of not obviously walking off the side of an invisible bridge. Are you insane?
Well, it also, even like I had a character who I decided had gotten some sort of religious fervor and willfully walked him off the bridge, and he still survived in the end. That was
Oh yeah, no, I get, and I just did the rules for like the yeah. Anyway, but I
so.
also think like I'm very much not I'm not a sandbox GM, and I'm not an old school like D&D GM. So I just don't understand how to run it, and I probably just ran it like wrong in inverted commas. I think we still had a good time. I don't know how much Dungeon Crawl Classics I want to play in the future. Um, it seems to be a game written by someone who bloody loves wizards and is happy for there to be 120 pages on wizards and two on all of the other classes. But it does strike me that like, well, what about people who are playing those other classes? Hey,
I mean, okay. I mean, talking about RPGs, and this might be sort of taking a step out from what you were thinking of. We
Hey, it's Christmas. We can talk about whatever we want.
well, we went to Dragon Meet recently
We
together,
did.
which was a lovely
That was a festive
lovely
time.
lovely day out. First time I've been to a convention as a punter in absolutely years.
Mm.
And you picked up quite an armload of RPGs. Is there any of them that you're like excited to try out with us over the next year that you're sort of maybe looking to the future with a bit? Any you
Well,
just want to shout out to?
yeah. So the things I didn't pick up that many. The things that I picked up were the Book of Gaum, which is a system neutral book of spells. Basically because the designer has done this incredibly beautiful job with it, and it's very inspirational in terms of like uh very classical book design mixed with thingies. That's just like a collection of spells. I don't know that what I'll do with it. I don't think anything. I kind of wish I'd had it a year ago when I was designing the abyssal gods for Hobgoblin, because they definitely feel sort of in a similar place. Um I'll tell you what it made me want to do. You know, you get those tiny little boxes that contain multiple small books,
Yeah.
little mini books. I really want to do like a set of a little box with like 12 books, one for 8 books, one for each of the abyssal gods of Hobgoblin, just with a load of nonsense in them. And that's what this book is. It's a load of nonsense. Like it doesn't have any game rules in it or anything. It's just a load of nonsense, and it's wonderful. The second thing I bought was the book Unremitting Horror, which I have read and several times as a PDF and just keep meaning to pick up. It's just a book of like modern monsters. The premise of the book is the problem with every Lovecraft game or Call of Cthulhu game is that everyone knows what a deep one and what a MIGO is. So let's reset the horror. And so you just get these really imaginatively disgusting kind of, and I described it to Glenn as liminal horror. It isn't technically liminal horror, but it's got that like sort of modern folk monster vibe to it. There's a lot of like monsters that won't attack you if you don't look at them, but if you do look at them, you're dead. Like that kind of, that kind of spooky stuff.
Sort of SCP. I don't know if you've
It's
come.
very, very SCP. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's 100%. It could basically SCP the role playing game, which I think is basically what Easter Terrorists, the book that it was converted, this edition is converted to work with. Yeah, and the other thing I got was a hex crawl based on whatchamacallits, um
Anonymous Bosch's Garden
Anonymous
of Earthly
Bosch.
Delights.
Yeah. Um, Partly because I'm investigating hex crawls for reasons, and partly because it was a beautiful execution of taking some old artwork and doing something cool with it. But yeah, so I don't know. That was my haul. Will we play anything? Probably not. I'd like to play some more Trail of Cthulhu next year, maybe. Um, I still want to play a Warhammer Fantasy role play where we go chasing vampires, but
We tried playing some Warhammer
we
Fantasy.
we did. I asked Rufus, could we go chasing vampires, and he pushed us all into a sex dungeon with a wizard.
I mean, yeah, well, it was a dungeon. There was a wizard. I don't remember the sex. Oh no, no, actually, yeah, no, actually, I do remember the.
Actually, you might have pushed me in.
No, I mean, it wasn't. You were put into the room. I was really expecting the GM to back out from that commitment
Yeah.
at some point prior to the final consummation. But no, no, that it
But
was.
yeah, we played some Gaslands themed role playing a couple of years ago, and I've got an itch to do some more of that because I've got like being surrounded by indie role playing projects at Dragon Meet obviously got the gears turning on some old and discarded projects and unearthing them.
So, are there any other minis games you want to quickly round
Oh
up?
man, I played a few other ones. So what else did I play? Played a bit of 7TV. I've been really excited to give that a go, and I want to play it again. We didn't have an incredibly successful first game, but I like the system and I want to play some more of the scenarios. I played a few games of Adeptus Titanicus this year, which is glorious in its lumberingness. Like it knows exactly what it's doing. I really like the way that the mission system works. Um, I don't think it's stolen from because it's a fairly obvious thing, but like the way that the Chaos of War tables creates a sort of procedurally generated combat scenario for Hobgoblins. Very, very much the same system that happens in Adeptus Titanicus, although Adeptus Titanicus does it with a deck of cards. Yeah, back to Call to Arms actually. It sort of felt like, there's a lot of like big box miniature games with loads of cards in it. Call to Arms feels like most of the cards, but none of the miniatures, and you sort of buy the miniatures as you need them.
Yeah.
I'm increasingly interested about, as you say, like the sort of the bloated wastefulness of those, and like how you can condense all of that density of gameplay into very basic do-it-yourself components and pack it in anyway. And that's about it for new miniatures games. We played a few other bits and bobs, but
Yeah, I mean,
not
of
much really
those
worth mentioning.
of those 7 TV, again, it's one I keep coming back to, and I think we've struggled to get some of the levers to it to work. To be honest, some of the times when we've played it, and more, I think that that's a game that I want a GM for. Um,
Hmm.
if only just for the victory conditions, because I think that the thing with 7 TV is a lot of the time is I want to not have victory points attached to what I'm doing. I want to be told you're trying to do this and you're trying to do that. Those are the things you want to aim towards, and then play the game, and then have a guy sat next to the table go, yeah, well, the thing you did the thing you were trying to do in a more appropriate manner or to a more appropriate degree, you get the win, rather than having to do it like it just doing it with points just doesn't work. It just doesn't have the right motivations for the dramatic scene,
Yes, that's interesting.
in my
Actually, so it reminds me of the one big thing on the list that I completely forgot to mention, which is I played a buttload of 10th edition Warhammer 40,000 this year. And one of the things that 10th edition 40K has is like each turn the missions that you're doing kind of refresh and regenerate. So to a degree, you're like a cat chasing a laser pointer, where what you're trying to achieve keeps flipping from turn to turn. And in the previous edition, it was sort of there was a joke about like incredibly indecisive generals that just like capture point A. No, I meant point C. No, I meant point A. No, I meant point D. And you have to like totter from one side of the battlefield to the other each turn. But in Perilous Tales, there's this like everyone has three objectives, and they're like sequential narrative things where it's like, uncover the ritual, then, destroy the monolith, then call the helicopter and escape. And it feels like uh that kind of there's a three-act structure built in to the card deck of 7 TV, and it's almost like I really want that to be the way that it drives the victory conditions. Is like you have to do you can score for one thing in Act 1, and then that victory condition goes away, and then in Act 2 you have to do a different thing, and in Act 3 you have to do a different thing. And you could create, I think, a fairly procedural system with that kind of chaining of like, no, you don't get points for running away in Act 1. You have to be like in the middle of the table or whatever. Like, you could control the narrative, I think, really
yeah,
nicely.
possibly. So if there's nothing else to round up from last
Well,
year.
the one other thing, this has miniatures in, although it's not technically a miniatures game. I played Blood Rage again for the first time in
All right.
ages. Only worth mentioning simply because it reminded me how rewarding people for having their stuff killed is such a great and glorious and underused mechanic.
Yeah, no, and it's an interesting one and a weird one, because it's like in minis games, some people get really annoyed at the idea of rewarding people for having their stuff killed, because
Hmm.
it feels like a catch-up mechanic and a way of letting somebody off,
Yeah.
and it's like I think something like Blood Rage obviously is built, it's built like centrally into the theme. You're off to Valhalla and you're being rewarded for it. Um, I like the idea of giving people resources when their stuff dies, and obviously it's right there in Gaslands when you get your audience votes. But
And in Hobgoblin, when you get
yeah,
prizes for getting deleted.
yeah, I think it's certainly something to. I think making deaths a more interesting moment is a worthwhile thing.
And I think there's that lovely pivot point in Blood Rage where it looks like you got absolutely kicked in the pants, and then you reveal the fact that it's like, aha, and now I get loads of bonus points because I got loads of people killed, and everyone's like, ah, and you're like, yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's a really good game, that.
Lovely, lovely. Um, should we talk quickly about what we have in mind for next year, and then I thought might quickly round up some non-minis or non-tabletop games we've played. Or
Yeah, totally, totally.
so things fiddling with for the future. Obviously, I've got Puke Apocalypse coming out hopefully around March-ish next year,
Ooh,
around that timeline.
very
Um,
exciting.
I'm knocking around. Well, I'm hopefully finishing up and doing some proper playtesting of a thing called Playlandia at the moment. It's gone through a few different names. A co-op or soloable, what I consider true co-op, as opposed to just lots of people on one side versus the game, miniatures game.
A collaborative game.
Well, a game that you couldn't play solo multi-handed,
Mm.
to the
Ah.
rather than playing the cooperative version of it, because you
Yes.
do get, I think, a lot of time in minis games, and not saying it's a bad sort of design choice, co-op games where I could just quite happily take all of those forces that are on my side, run them all on my own, and it would make zero difference, like the way the game ran and whatnot.
Mm.
Whereas this is my attempt to do something like a game like Hanabi or something where you cannot play solo, like with the co-op rule, with the co-op rules, because it has hidden information and
Mm.
limited communication and things of that nature. And I'm really sort of liking that. And knocking around Borders of Black Flags into shape for a late 2024 Kickstarter, and going back to What Ho and refiddling with that and getting that working again to maybe be a Kickstarter for 2025.
Nice.
What sorts of things?
Mannequin roadmap right there.
Well, I think it's yeah. Well, I've got an SSO release for next year, and I want to do a Boards and Black Flags release next year. And then what I'd like to do is like a card game or board game release and a minis game release on Kickstarter each year for myself, and
Mm.
then put things out with publishers and such like, that I can track down. Have you got plans for the of designs that you're working on at the moment?
I have many. I'm going to stay mysterious and taciturn on next year, because
Okay.
I've got plenty of plans, some of which still need to be straightened out, and I'm probably going to come hot out the gate in January with some sort of fresh information about what I'm up to, but haven't really pinned down exactly where everything's going to fall out yet. Um, Definitely. So just in the last phases, what is a couple of weeks ago now, from when this is going out, of putting together, like, crossing the final T's on the Hobgoblin manuscript. The layout is amazing. I've seen all the like final artwork and final photographs. It looks wicked. So I'm really happy with how that rulebook's come out. I don't know exactly when it gets printed, but we've sent the PDF off for the proofing and the technical checks, uh, a little while back. So yeah, that's going to be cool to see that out, and then figuring out how to support the release of that and get people interested in playing it. Um, and then yeah, in terms of things coming out, probably nothing in the first half of next year, and then things are going to get interesting, I think.
And obviously Pacific Command.
Well, I'm handing it in. That ain't coming out till 24.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So last time we did one of these videos, and this is in the way of a sort of a roundup, we mentioned some digital games that we'd been playing over the previous year. And
Mm.
I was thinking about the digital games that I'd been playing over the last sort of 6 to 8 months. And interesting, I had a couple of odd conclusions. So, two games that I've been playing. One was a game called Phoenix Point, which is a turn-based XCOM like, and another game was called Road 96, which is a sort of narrative. Is really a series of mini games connected together by a narrative about teenage runaways all trying to cross the border of a sort of dictatorship state at the same point.
Mm.
It's funny, and I bring them up because I was just scanning through my library to see what I'd played over the last year, and obviously on Steam it gives you the number of hours you put into them. And I think that Road 96 was around about the 10-hour mark, maybe 10 or
Mm.
12 hours. And Phoenix Point was 153 hours.
Nice.
And I cannot remember a single like piece of music or specific like really impactful moment or anything particularly about Phoenix Point. Whereas there are some there are like moments in Road 96 that sometimes I found myself like wandering through the day and it's just popped into my head.
Oh wow.
And I think those are possibly a good example. And I was looking through my library generally and realizing that all the games that have really stuck with me are down on that sort of 12 hours or less playtime, and everything over the 100 hours or whatnot have all just become a sort of a vague grind by the end of it. It's like I finally finished Darkest Dungeon this year after quite a few hours of play, and it's right up there in the hours. And I have a general feel of the sense of the game, but nothing like as impactful as any of the moments from those much shorter games. And the other digital game that I played this year that I was thinking about, and I mentioned to you the other week, is a game called Dredge,
Oh yeah.
where you're a sort of a fisherman who goes around and picks up and catches fish, and some of them come out and they're mutant, and then if you're sailing in the middle of the night, you go mad, and there are like monsters come out of it. And I was thinking about it because I was reading a review, not reading a review actually, watching a YouTube about horror games generally that said the Dredge isn't a horror game.
Mm.
Thinking about it, and it's like they were right. They're right, it's not, because you have total control. You can learn all the patterns. I was never scared. It's definitely a horror themed game, but I was never scared at any point playing that game. There nothing ever sort of made me I feel sort of afraid. There was a definite horror theme. It was very Lovecraftian. There was like a twist, and there's madness and madness mechanics in it, but it wasn't it wasn't a horror game. It isn't a horror game because of the sort of total control you have over it,
Mm.
and the way it feels to play it. And I have been thinking recently about like horror as genre as opposed to horror as experience. Because and tracking this back to Mirror's games, I I don't know if there are any horror as an experience minis games. There's tons of horror as a genre minis games, but I just don't know if anywhere I'd say like, yeah, there's.
I just don't know if it's a thing the medium's capable of.
Well, one of my notes for a possible rule of Carnage conversation is horror a cursed problem, and we might get to this again.
Yeah, it might be for our medium, yeah.
I don't know. I have an opinion, and I have on the board somewhere a my the typical thing of Glenn trying to answer these sorts of questions for himself. I do have.
Glenn tries to scare children using terrifying miniatures game.
Well, no, it's when that's not even because this is the thing, and I mean we I won't go on about this for too long, but I think
Give us the elevator pitch.
well I think the issue with horror in minis games is the same thing that's a problem with like jump scare horror in digital games is
Mm.
that it's a simple visual it's a gag. It's I remember reading a guy who designed horror games, and he said that jump scares are like if you went to see a comedian and the comedian ran down off the stage and tickled you and went, well, you laughed, therefore, I think you'll find I'm an excellent comedian, and then buggered off again. And and that's all and he was saying that's all jump scares are. They're just the game going.
Just
You
forcing a
can't
physiological
yeah,
response.
you can't help it. This is going to make you twitch. There you go.
Right.
You jumped. I
Startle
laughed.
reaction. Yeah.
Yeah, now I am a good horror game, and I think to make a minis game, it's why I was talking to you about liminal horror. I think
Mm.
you tap into something else. But I
Yeah,
think that's a
right. Yeah,
conversation
no,
we need to like.
I completely agree. Like, is there some way of making a miniatures game uncanny? Maybe.
Yeah, like I say, I have an opinion, but this is not the time for it. This is a lovely Christmassy roundup of our year's experiences.
Ho
So,
ho ho ho,
ho
liminal
ho
ho.
ho.
Speaking of that, I played a bunch of puzzle games when I was a little bit stressed at work and needed things that weren't going to jump scare me. Because I've been playing Dead Space at the beginning of the year, which wasn't helping. Still lovely. I bloody loved that game the first time it came around. The remaster's great. But I played Stray, which has a really good simulation of cats meowing, but like is so. The puzzles are fine. The story's nice. Whatever. Beautiful game. It's fine. Pedestrian, which I sort of bounced off. That's like a sort of two-dimensional puzzle inside a three-dimensional environment. That was fine. Bounced off it. Superliminal, which really caught my attention, and I just bloody loved. I'm sure that's completely obvious and non-controversial to say, but yeah, the way that it messes with that medium is so delightful
Yeah.
and just wonderful. Um, that's the sort of like that's the sort of piece of creative work that makes you want to make better creative work regardless of your medium. You're just like, oh, somebody really understanding what they're doing and where their constraints are and blowing the doors off of other constraints,
Mm.
or imagined constraints. That's super good. And I played Call of the Sea, which was sort of it was Lovecrafty themed and had sort of horror vibes to it, but was just ridiculously chill and very pretty. But the games that I played the most of, I played a very large amount of Bolt Gun, which just worked for me on every level. It's a 90s boomer shooter, I think is what they call it. Like it's basically Doom 2 with a modern control scheme. And they just nailed the like heavy metal 90s version of GW. Like it just all feels like a Bolt Thrower album cover. The whole thing is just pitched absolutely perfectly. And the writing is really good. Like the jokes are funny. The little servo skull that talks to you. So things that genuinely amused me during the play, like just off the cuff, like stuff where you walk into like an area and he'll say something reverent about the things that are going on, and it's just very funny. But I also, and this is probably the same as last year, I just played like hundreds of hours of Elden Ring, just hundreds and hundreds of hours more of Elden Ring. And if I might just sort of wax lyrical on a few things that I've been learning from that, because my God, this is still like a bottomless learning experience. This game is so incredible as a piece of game design kind of education. So one of the things I've been enjoying playing the game in different ways and started doing some speed runs and sort of challenging myself to like complete certain parts of the game or get to a certain part of the game within. And so I kind of began to discover like this mastery curve of learning where everything is. And even though it's a monstrous environment, we know about those kinds of mastery curves, and it was interesting to do it here. And then we started messing about with a new format, which is there's some sort of public competitions using bingo cards where you get a 5 by 5 grid of things that you then achievements that you have to achieve, and then you have to go and achieve the most number of them. And it was a super interesting meta game layer placed over the top of this complicated game, and got me thinking about how we approach objectives and kind of progression or player progression inside the kind of games that we do. And so I'm definitely kind of experimenting with some things in that area. I mean, there's already an achievement system for Gaslands if you care to fish it out of my downloads page, but I think there's more to do there, and there's more to think about in terms of like how can your game um, inspire and engender kind of meta games to sit on top of it, which some of the bigger miniature games have managed to do, but I think it's much more common in larger player population games like TCGs and stuff where formats emerge.
I definitely think that's an interesting thing to sort of fiddle around with and encourage people to dig into certain bits of the game. It's like I said, I've got a thing in SSO which I fairly openly ripped off of Hostage Negotiator,
Mm.
which is like narrative achievements for if you do X and Y, because it plays out the beats of a particular sci-fi movie, you get an achievement referencing that sci-fi movie. Um,
Yeah,
difficult.
and then the final thing that I've been doing recently is I bought the damn thing again a second time on PC. It's 60 quid, but like I've definitely got 60 quid out of the PlayStation version. So I thought I'll probably get 60 quid out of the PC versions. I started installing mods, and I installed this randomizer mod which moves all of the items and monsters around. And so it takes an incredibly carefully crafted sort of open world experience and just scrambles it completely. And relearning the game and experiencing it that way has been incredibly eye-opening about the design and where some of the pressure points on the design are, and where randomizing it has broken things and where randomizing hasn't actually broken it, or indeed has made it stronger for a certain kind of experience, and engendered a different kind of experience. And we've been messing around with the Realm of Chaos tables only this last week, farting about creating warbands. I am, I guess I'm really intrigued about why roguelike, or maybe roguelite, isn't more of a thing in miniature games. It's quite a thing in board games with miniatures. But I think I'm currently exploring from a design perspective, like where there are possibilities to do more of that stuff. And I know that reps is one of the things, but yeah, I think that's got me thinking.
Right. Well, we might delve into some of those things in conversations in the future of Rule of Carnage coming up in the next year. But I think that will do for that little roundup of our 2023, and I'll look forward to our 2024.
Mm.
Um, to anybody watching, thank you for having, stuck with the channel over the last year, and hopefully going with us into the next year. We've got sort of things planned, hopefully, and it should be interesting content and stuff for people to enjoy. Please do swing down to the comment section, tell me what you've been playing and enjoying over 2023, and what you're looking forward to in 2024 and beyond. While you're down there, do hit us a Christmas presenty shaped like and subscribe. And then swing by the Discord and wish everybody season's greetings.
Do you
Uh,
know, Glenn, do you know the origin of the term Boxing Day?
I've probably heard it. It hasn't stuck.
I think it was in the 1800s they invented it, and it was tradespeople of like rich houses basically kind of fell into the habit of asking for a box, which is essentially like a tip on the day after Christmas, and it became such a big thing that like everyone started expecting them, and it became a big convention. So much so that they invented a whole name for a day. So Boxing Day is actually based on butchers and bakers getting their little cut at the end of the year. So if you would like to drop a penny in the old man's hat for Rule of Carnage, you can do it by going to patreon.com/Planet Smasher Games for Mike if you want to submit, if you want to support what I'm doing, and in general what we are doing.
Yep.
Or you, of course, you can go to planetsmashergames.com and buy some of my games by following some of the links. Glenn, how can someone fill your stocking with Christmas joy?
I mean, they can swing over to mannequingames.com and pick up one of the wide range of games and bits and merch. I don't know. Maybe I will monetize my Patreon by the time this comes out. I have a Patreon, and its link is also.
I
Um,
would say if you do go to Manor Kent Games, find the link to Kickstarter and follow Manor Kent Games on Kickstarter so you find out when Glenn runs his next campaigns.
yeah, sign up to the mailing list. Follow me on any form of social media, really. I tend to talk a lot about whatever I'm doing whenever it's happening. So, yes, do follow us, do stick with us, for the next year. Thank you for being with us for this year. And yeah, stop by the Discord and say Merry Christmas. But for now, and from Rule of Carnage and from 2023, I guess it's a thank you and goodbye. So, goodbye.
Oh, 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 oh. Bye.
Such a ham.